right, guys. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. Welcome to the Independent Education Institute Straight Talk webinar series. We are so glad that you have joined us. My name is Beatrice, and I will be your host today on behalf of IFDF, or Independent Funeral Directors of Florida. This is our 42nd Straight Talk continuing education webinar since we began the series back in August 2020. Some housekeeping points to qualify for continuing education credit. You must be an IFDF member, firm establishment owner, individual member, or affiliate member. You must log into Zoom using your full name and remain logged into each webinar for the entirety of the event. You guys can't skip class. You got to stay here, right? Upon the conclusion of this webinar, forward your Florida license number to Heather Bernier at hbernier@ifdf.org. I will place her email address in the chat section for you all to request a 1-hour CD credit certificate. Thank you very much. We will be taking questions after the presentation. You may post your questions in the chat or Q&A boxes at the bottom of your screen. We will be monitoring both boxes so we can participate with you, and we encourage you to post your questions after the presentation as well. Today, we are excited to have 777 Concepts offer threat recognition and response options, which empowers participants with the knowledge, skills, and proactive strategies necessary to mitigate the risk of violence within the business environment. By fostering preparedness and resilience, this course enables businesses to protect their assets, employees, and reputation in the face of potential threats, focusing on what to do in the event there is an active shooter at your place of business. I would like to introduce today's presenters, Barrett Boyett, Tony Cook, and James Ferguson. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for being here today and educating us on what we hope to never have to practice.
Absolutely.
Barrett, since you'll be our presenter for the day, please tell us about yourself and the rest of your team.
Hey, first off, thank you for allowing us the opportunity to come and talk to y'all today. We appreciate it. Hopefully, we can provide some information of value for you. My name is Barrett Boyett. I'm one of the co-founders of 777 Concepts with both James Ferguson and Tony Cook, who are with me today. Just a little bit about us. Between the three of us, we have over a half century of law enforcement experience. We're active law enforcement members at a medium-sized agency in North Central Florida. About 3 decades worth of SWAT experience in between us. And all that doesn't mean anything except for the fact that it's afforded us the opportunity to experience a lot of different things, participate in some higher level training, and be exposed to a lot of information that a lot of people aren't experiencing, and allow us to have information that closely follows trends related to active shooters or mass shooting type incidents. Hopefully we can relay some stuff along those lines to assist you in your business.
Well,
what I'll do is I've got a presentation I'm going to share for you, and with any luck it will all work perfectly, but because it's technology, who knows.
Well, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here again today.
All right. There is only one slide with sound. It's not allowing me to check it right now, but when we get to that slide, I'll see if we can't have it figured out for you by then.
We'll let you know.
Sure. All right. So I recognize that in your industry, really most industries in general, this information may seem like overblown. You may be wondering what are the actual risks of your business or your employees or the visitors or people visiting your site might be at risk for an active shooter. And to be clear up front, we are going to talk about active shooters in what you see on TV, in the news, the highly publicized. You can think of a school shooting or a Pulse nightclub, but beyond that, you have risk of spontaneous violence just based on the type of business that you're in. just incidental violence that might be occurring around you that you might be involved in, employment, place of employment, or workplace violence. All these things are what we're going to talk about today. So what I'm displaying on the screen in front of you are a series of headlines I found through open source searching in about 30 seconds. So it doesn't take very long to recognize that there is a potential risk of violence at your specific workplace. And these are all funeral homes or at funeral events. As I go through and start talking through some statistics, all this information, all the stats I'll be pulling up, it's all open source, publicly available, either through the federal government or other vendors. Uh, there's a study in particular that I'll post the sources as needed or requested as we go on. So recognizing that when we put together content for a presentation such as this, the goal is to make it as specific as pertinent to the people who are attending. Uh, Unfortunately, for funeral homes or specific businesses in general, there's no entity that's collecting information specifically related to active shooters or mass shootings at funeral homes. Like that pool of information doesn't exist. So we've got to look at general trends, general information, try to compile that, and you make best guesses of actual risks that might be involved. So we're going to cover over the next few slides this from the FBI with their data collection on active shooter incidents over the past several years, and we'll narrow the timeline a little bit. So you can see what I really want you to kind of focus on here when you're looking at 2000 to 2019. It might be a little blurry. The report this came from is a little dated, but you see on the far right, the last date there, the number of incidents, there's a total of 30 incidents for the year. And that is following a trend of increased numbers of active shooter incidents occurring. That's going through 2019. This is a snapshot just from 2023. The FBI releases this data every year. Obviously, 2024 is not available yet, but this is the most recent data for last year. You've got your 48 incidents that occurred. I'll go back to the previous slide for a moment. Following that trend of increased incidents at the end of that time period, 30, we're up to 48. And we want to look at trends. We don't want to isolate 2023 in general, but I just want to illustrate that the trend continues of increased numbers of incidents as things go on. With increased incidents comes increased casualties and on-scene deaths, all of things that we wish to avoid. So let's go back to 2019 through 2023. So in a 5-year period, you nearly have the same number of incidents as you did in the previous 20 years. Rapid increase in the number of active shooters. Just kind of putting that all in a graph, all in an illustration for you. So for the past 23 years, past 2000 to last year, I know the graph's a little confusing, but you can definitely see the total number of incidents, and along with that, the number of casualties, people injured or killed, is trending upwards for sure. So I just want to cover a few stats. I don't want to just bore you with bullet points, though there's going to be some of that on here, but just some additional things, numbers for you to be aware of when you look at what your risk is as a funeral home. And like I said, the number specific to funeral homes, that number doesn't exist. But if we look at businesses in general, the vast majority of active shooter, mass shooter incidents that occur are at businesses, commercial entities, for each year. So between 2019 and 2023, almost half, 43% of all active shooter incidents that occurred were at businesses. And in 2023, those 43% accounted for the majority, for the most casualties, both total casualties and deaths. So as for individual locations, for each year, you could go year by year, but for each year, businesses, now to be fair, most of those are retail locations or entertainment industry locations, but still businesses that are open to the public that have people coming and going. account for the single largest number of active shooter incidents and also the most casualties. I understand for you, depending on where you are, your location, whether a city, rural area, or otherwise, response of law enforcement or EMS to your location or to your event location, a best case scenario is going to be several minutes. So understand that anything you can do to prevent an incident from occurring, slow event down, or mitigate the damage or risk from an event, anything you can do can absolutely save lives and prevent uh, damage to lives, but also your property and business as well. We're looking at the likelihood of an incident like this occurring. We recognize, and our goal is not to inflate the risks of active shooter or active violence at your place of business. We just want you to make you aware that it is a thing that can occur, and while it may be a low probability, it's a very high consequence event. So something we want to take into consideration when we're looking at ways to mitigate those types of things. So we'll really focus on the last two on this list here, so violent crimes, and then I want to make a distinction for an active assailant. So for violent crimes, we're talking about a spontaneous event. You are moderating or running events that are emotional. You've got family members that may not get along, parties involved that may not get along. There's a potential for spontaneous violence, whether with weapons or not. It is there, and it is at an increased risk as opposed to just any other public event. Targeted violence. When we talk about if it is an event for a victim of a violent crime or gang-related crime, you have the increased risk of targeted violence on the people attending that event. So not necessarily random violence, but specifically targeted at the people attending or on the event itself. A lot of those headlines displayed in the first slide were from events that were targeted at funerals of violent crime victims or gang related. And then really the least likely, but probably most damaging type of events is the active shooter, as most people think about it, the mass killer. Say it's a predatory event. They've used the term pseudo commando recently to kind of define that that individual. So rather than just a targeted like gang violence, a person who is committing this, they're picking a public location that they've likely scouted in advance. Generally, they're well equipped with an arsenal of weapons. It's well planned out. Many times you'll have a manifesto or something released after the fact. They want it to be visible. This isn't someone who's trying to avoid capture. So while the least likely to occur is still something we need to take into consideration. If you look in the past 20 years, all the schools or churches or other businesses that had these types of events occur, and no one started their day expecting to be a victim of that type of violence. So, let's just say, a realistic expectation that as time goes on, this is something that can occur. So many times, whether it's a pseudo commando or spontaneous violence or a act of workplace violence, it's a totally separate issue that we can go into. The target's usually chosen for a reason. Workplace violence, it's the workplace they are attacking is related to a grievance, whether real or something that they imagine. The If it's a gang or victim of violent crime type location, the actual venue isn't related to the grievance, but the people are. That's one way that these locations are being targeted. Locations are being targeted because of their accessibility and vulnerability. And it's really one of the things we'll focus on. We talk about methods of mitigating or reducing your risks. Is while we recognize and you're running a business and you can't turn your business into a fortress and still do business, but finding easy ways or the less intrusive ways of making your business less vulnerable and less accessible to people who are choosing to potentially cause it harm. Now that pseudo commando, the true active shooter you think of when they're going and targeting a location, it's much more difficult to predict when or where a person like that may strike. But once again, if we look at vulnerability, accessibility, that pseudo commando, while they may not have any intention on getting out alive or care about surviving, they want to be public, they want to do as much damage as possible. So if through defensive strategies we make or you make your location look less inviting, you cause that person to look at another location where they may be successful for longer. So a lot of this is going to be common sense. If you're an adult, you've been around people. Many times we can recognize emotions on people based on their facial expressions and demeanor. Just something you can pay attention to. Another major component of defensive strategy should be attentive staff, and we'll cover that here shortly. But in the event that there is going to be an event, the sooner we can recognize it, the more likely it is that we can limit the damage or prevent the damage from occurring. So things we should be looking out for when you have people attending an event, precursors to violence, are things you might already recognize. You have that clenched jaw or an individual clenching their fists, yelling or screaming, raised voices, cursing. Those are a pretty good indicator. If someone is unable to stay still, they're pacing around, refuse to sit down, pointing, I mean, aggressively pointing, sticking their finger in somebody's face, staring, aggressive stare, not just eye contact, but that aggressive stare, that 1,000-yard stare, flush face, or your heavy breathing or panting. Now, none of these things in and of themselves are indicator that someone's going to be violent. You're all particularly at a funeral event where emotions are already high. So you might already be encountering some of these without it being linked to violence. But when you start having multiple of these indicators combined together, we definitely want to start looking at a situation, start making a determination if you want to try to separate people, de-escalate the situation, or make some efforts to mitigate that pending aggression. So beyond just indicators of physical aggression, for you and your staff, things we can look for to tell if somebody is armed. And some of these are fairly universal and are subconscious. If someone is armed, unless they are very well trained or specifically trying to counter some of these, it's kind of just instinctual behavior that you'll see over and over again. If you're paying attention and once you see it once, you won't be able to unsee it. So things to look for in individuals that you might be dealing with or you might be seeing around your business is what's called a security check. And that can take the shape of several different forms, but generally what will be is a person who has a weapon on them, concealed generally. As they move around, as they move from, if they're sitting down and stand up, or as they move or bend over to pick something up, they're wanting to make sure that weapon is still secured and hidden on their person. So that might look like if a person picks up something from the ground and then they touch their hip or touch the front of their pants to ensure that a weapon is still there. And very much like the other indicators, like none of these in and of themselves, except for seeing the weapon, are 100%. But when you start seeing these things together, we might actually have indication that an individual may be armed. If they stand up or sit down and they're touching a specific location on their pant line, usually, or checking a pocket, or if they're wearing a jacket, you're touching a jacket pocket. And it's usually no more than just a touch or a pat, and you're just ensuring that that's there. Or if every time they move, they go and tug the back of their shirt down. It's a pretty good indicator that they may be carrying some type of weapon, whether it be a firearm, a club, a knife. There's a fairly good indicator that there is something there. Unnatural gait, when generally for most people, if they're not injured in some fashion, that what a normal walk looks like. Hands and arms will be swinging freely, and your feet are tracking smoothly. But if you see an individual who only one arm is swinging, and one arm is only swinging a little bit, or one arm stays still, or you're walking with a stiff leg just on one side, nothing, no 100%, but a potential indicator that there might be a weapon there they're trying not to interact with. Once again, once you see something like that, you start paying attention, you might start picking up on some of these other indicators. Bulges or outlines of a weapon, that's kind of a dead giveaway. If you see the shape of a gun in someone's pocket, or shape of a knife in someone's pocket, or the handle of a knife or a gun sticking out of their clothing, pretty good indication that they're armed. Palming is a pretty good indicator, but it's specifically generally related to edged weapons, where they'll take out a edge weapon and they're holding it in their palm with the blade against their forearm, concealing it from view. It's a pretty specific method of holding your hand. It's just something to be looking out for. And clothing, it doesn't match the season. Yeah, not sure if everyone's from Florida or not, but Florida in the middle of summer, it's 90, 100 degrees and very humid. If someone's wearing a parka, uh, something you might want to pay attention to. It's unusual, it doesn't match the season, and can be used to conceal weapons. Now, depending on your location and venue, an individual being armed in and of itself may not be a major deal, but we're just trying to give you indicators to look for so you can make an educated decision how you want to address that situation, whether you don't address it until else it becomes a problem, or if you contact law enforcement, or if you have security staff who might want to check on that individual. Just things to look for. Now, taking those other factors into play, the aggressive behaviors, indicators of someone being armed, there's some other warning signs that we can look for. And the obvious one is threats, written or verbal threats, whether they're posted on social media, made face to face. Their credibility is going to vary based on the source and in many factors. But many times, particularly when we look at workplace violence or the targeted violence, there's a large number of the situations, there is some type of threat prior to an event occurring. Surveillance. If you start noticing individuals who don't appear to fit in with the events that you're having, and you see them multiple times, or you see a vehicle multiple times, or someone's taking pictures at an event of things not related to the event. So, potential security features that you might have, such as gates or cameras or locked doors, or staff. Something you might want to be looking at as a potential warning sign of pending violence. And a lot of these things should just heighten our awareness. I recognize we don't want to overreact. Again, you're running a business, fairly low probability of an event occurring, but it's just things for us to be aware of. And if we start checking some of these boxes, just start heightening our awareness a little bit and making start looking at some of our response options. And then final act behaviors. Many times this will be workplace violence related, an employee, someone that you're interacting with, where they start giving away items that are important to them, or if they're not being terminated, they're resolving stuff at work as though they will not be working there anymore. When you factor that in with some of these other indicators, it could be a sign of concern. Risk factors for specific events. As I said before, anytime you have a victim of a violent crime or of gang violence, there is a heightened risk of retaliation or violence that occurs at that situation. So some things you might want to consider while working, knowing this going into it in advance, is deciding whether or not you advertise the event, whether it's a completely private situation, which kind of removes that intel from the general public, makes it less likely for people who aren't supposed to be there to show up, or whether or not if you do hire or contract with a security company or your local law enforcement agencies, most of which you will provide security, provide deputies or officers for security at events if requested. All right, so let's actually get into some ways that we can look at preventing or mitigating one of these events occurring at your location. That's really what we're looking at. We want to, ideally, in a perfect world, we deter an incident from occurring. The incident that never occurs, that's the one that's the best. And while we don't want an event to happen anywhere, if it doesn't happen at your location, that's better. So some things that we can do, we'll cover all of these topics briefly, but you want to look at it as a whole package. We don't want to focus entirely on any one of these things. We want to have several of these working in conjunction so that in the event, and there are failures, equipment fails, people fail. In the event we have a failure on one of these layers, we want to have some redundancy to help us out. So we want to look at these as a layered system. So first and foremost, deterrence is what we're looking for. If we can prevent one from occurring, that's ideal. And some ways that a lot of these are going to overlap, which is good, just from a a business or financial standpoint or implementing these, a lot of these will overlap. So that's a positive for you. So if anything that is going to take a person who's intending violence and making it more likely they're going to be apprehended, making it less likely they're going to be successful, or it making your location look like it will be more challenging to be effective there. So simply having staff that's attentive, not just to events are occurring, but to their surroundings and just the general area around them. Just having attentive staff can go a long ways to making, if someone who thinks a location might be an easy target, make it, slightly less likely to be targeted. Having visible cameras, whether they, my preference would always be cameras at work, but even if they don't work, having cameras visible, indicating that it's less likely that if an event occurs that, or make it more likely those people will be identified and potentially captured later. Having facilities that are well lit, parking lots that are well lit, not having any areas on the property that are dark or allow access to the property without being seen at night. Having controlled access, so you know, one thing recognizing you're trying to run a business, but you're limiting the number of access points to the building. So not having 15 doors unlocked at all times. You're having a few points of access that are controlled, and having any type of visible defense, whether it's barriers for people, barriers for vehicles, anything that might slow or make an approach to a location more difficult. All those can add towards deterring an individual from targeting your location to begin with, and that's where we want to win the situation from, is just preventing it from happening. And you can also look at this from a with the layers, the furthest out being deterrence. As we move through the numbers, we're getting closer and closer to your business. So after deterrence, if there is going to be a situation that occurs, we want to know about it as quickly as possible. The sooner we recognize that there is a threat, the more time we have to put a plan into place, call 911, you activate any type of defensive measures that we may have, or escape from the scene to begin with. If we don't know what's happening until the moment it's happening, you're stuck with what you got. Even knowing a few seconds in advance, uh, seeing a threat in the parking lot before they make it inside your business, I mean, the difference between success and failure. And even beyond a shooter or killer, being able to just minimize disturbance to the inside. So for that detection, that layer of defense, we want to look at those cameras. That's why my preference is always going to be actual functional cameras. And you can look at closed circuit cameras or IP cameras that are visible from offsite or viewable remotely, and having the staff or someone who's actually paying attention to those. I'm not saying you have to watch it like a hawk, but it's having somebody during an event while you have people there paying somewhat of attention to your cameras, or if there are no cameras, you're paying attention to the surroundings, looking for those potential threats. So moving beyond that into our passive defenses. These are physical or environmental barriers. So you're talking about doors, the type of windows that you have at your location, access to your parking lot, uh, pedestrian access to your location. With your business, I say environmental, if there's a ravine or creek or river nearby that kind of prevents access to your location, anything that's limiting access to your location, preventing direct access inside of it, is going to be a passive defense. We talk about the natural environment, so your bodies of water, even a retention pond, um, ravines, and those type of environmental considerations. Doors and windows that are secure, and what they recognize, can't turn your business into Fort Knox and continue to run a business. But you're having the most secure windows that you can have, the most secure doors that you can have. So an individual can't just walk up a door, rock through a door or window, and gain access to the building if the doors are locked. There's multiple commercial options for windows, whether you just have really tough glass or film that's applied to the inside or outside that just prevents the whole window from falling out if it gets struck. Same with glass doors, having a film on there that prevents that whole door from coming out if they throw a rock or you fire a gun into it, uh, that can slow them in gaining access to your structure. That's what we're looking for. So the controlled access, having limiting the numbers of doors that are functional at any time. Now, I recognize that local codes could have some impact on what you're even able to do, but as much as possible, we want to control access to our building. Just looking at the numbers for an event that occurs at any location, if the individual is able to make it inside of a structure that has people in it, it's unlikely if they gain entrance that you're going to be able to get away completely clean without any type of casualties. We really want to keep people outside if we're able to notice it in advance. Limiting vehicle pedestrian traffic where possible or feasible. If you're able to set it up to where the families don't gather outside directly next to a major roadway, that would expose them to gunfire from vehicular traffic or pedestrian walking by on the street. Any types of fences or barriers around your business that just limit access. That's passive defenses that we're looking for. Next are active defenses. Now, some of this may or may not be practical for what you have going on. I recognize that most businesses, most funeral homes, probably are not employing security staff. I'm not implying that you should, but for certain instances, you may want to consider that contract you're hiring out with your local law enforcement or security agency in the situations that have increased risk. It's not when we're looking at active defensive, we don't want to just look at personnel that we can send to resolve a problem or slow a problem down, but any type of plan we can put in place that's going to contain or isolate a threat from you, your employees, and the people who are attending the event at your location. So, security personnel, whether they are employees or contracted, whether they're armed or unarmed, just things to consider. A big one, I'll talk about this specifically when we get a little bit later in the presentation, are lockdown or evacuation procedures. Probably, once we get to the active defense, outside of having law enforcement there to stop an issue as soon as it occurs, probably the single most important thing you can do when done appropriately to limit casualties on scene at your location or any location in reality. And contacting emergency services, getting law enforcement and EMS en route to you to both handle an active shooter if that is indeed the problem, or handle casualties that are there in place. The final layer we'll talk about resilience, and once again, recognizing your business, your goals may limit your ability to implement something along these lines, but understanding that in the event something like this occurs, you have traumatic injuries, and it doesn't have to be gunfire. If someone gets run over in your parking lot, or falls through a window and gets a significant cut, gash to an extremity, I don't expect anybody to play hospital, but you're having some equipment in place, particularly for traumatic injuries, that you can utilize that really requires minimal training and experience to do appropriately. Just having that on scene and available. But when we're talking about resilience, we're looking at trauma supplies. I don't mean just like a little first aid kit, but having equipment available on scene in the event you have a legitimate traumatic injury, arterial bleed from an extremity, a puncturing wound to the torso, something along those lines, and then the relevant training to go along with that. As I said, that type of equipment, the stuff you're going to have outside of a medical setting, it's relatively inexpensive and has a pretty low standard of training. They're made simple for a reason. So we're talking about tourniquets, chest seals, or items that we can place over a torso injury to limit additional damage in the event you have a penetrating injury to the torso, and special type of wound packing bandages to help stop bleeding outside the extremities. Just food for thought. That training's available. That equipment's commercially available. It's not cost prohibitive, and could mean a difference between life and death when you're looking at the several minute response time from EMS and law enforcement, not only for your employees and people who might be visiting there for an event, but for yourself as well. So I don't want to call it industry standard, but the general philosophy pushed by the federal government, and I think is a solid response to an active shooter, active threat on a location if you're not armed, is the concept of run, hide, fight. I'm gonna play a short video that hopefully I can get the audio to play on for you, and uh, we'll break it down after the fact. So let's see. Just let me know if you don't have any audio, and we'll get that resolved. It should be coming on now. No audio? All right. One moment, please. Beatrice, I don't know if you can select it for me. In the sharing options, I'm not able to share sound.
Let me see what I can do.
Okay. I'll talk while we're trying to get it sorted out. Let me back up. I'll cover basically the next few slides, and we'll go back and play the video to illustrate what it is that we're talking about. So very much like a tiered response, and in the order that's in run, hide, fight. You as an individual, whenever possible, if it's practical and safe to do so, we just want to remove ourselves from the situation. So depending on your business, how many employees you have, if you have an event going on, if that event occurs and you're able to evacuate yourself to a safer location offsite, that's going to be your primary goal. Um, we want to move a considerable distance away from the scene that's unfolding. Firearms have a pretty high threat range, and your actual location venue is going to kind of play into that. If you're in a fairly urban area and you can move to put additional buildings between you and the threat, it becomes much easier than if you're in a rural location and there's nothing but fields around. Kind of hard to remove yourself from the location if that occurs. Once again, depending on whether or not, and we'll talk about having a plan a little bit later on here, because that's really what a lot of this boils down to, is you're going to have to decide where your responsibilities lie as an employer or employee. You're responsible for your own life, but if you're able to evacuate yourself and others, we want to get other people out of there if at all possible. That's where the plan comes in, having set responsibilities to where you can save as much life as possible. Hey, save yourself first, but if you have the opportunity to other employees or bystanders that are there, you want to take them with you. An important part of that is having, like I said, a plan in place, knowing in advance where you can go, so you're not having to improvise on the fly. Beatrice, if we can't get the audio, it's not a big deal. I'm talking to the points anyways. We'll just use the illustrate if we're able to get that to work. Not a big deal.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Now, our second option is we want to hide, and this is where those lockdowns will come into play. I'll cover that specifically in a little more detail here in a moment. But we want to move ourselves out of immediate view of where an individual is, and we want to activate any lockdown procedures that we might have in place. Your venue is going to really determine what rooms or locations are practical to that. For that, where the event occurs is going to kind of play into if this is practical. But ultimately, we want to get in a location that you're out of view, where you can be quiet, not seen, and basically buy time until that the law enforcement or EMS response can get there. So we'll cover lockdowns more specifically here shortly. And as a last resort, once again, you have to make a determination on where your responsibilities lie. But if you're unable to remove yourself from the situation, unable to hide yourself from it, your last resort is going to be to fight for your life. So whenever if you find yourself in that situation, you want to coordinate as best you can with other people who are there. So you have other people other than just you trying to take the fight to an armed individual. Use improvised weapons whenever possible. Be as dynamic and as violent as possible in resolving this, recognizing that you are fighting for your life. All right, so on to lockdowns. So a recent study that came out, published December of 2022, had some really interesting information in it. They did a lot of good work related to schools, and then also as they worked through the study, just active shooter mass shooting incidents in general. But this is a study you can pull up on your own if you're interested. It's titled "Can School Lockdown Save Lives? An Assessment of Drills um, and Use in Real World Events." And the short story is that from their research, that lockdowns exert a strong protective influence, both in schools, but also in public school shooting situations. So there's businesses or open areas where people were able to successfully lock down. Now you're looking at nearly a 40% reduction in total casualties, and then also a 40% reduction in on-scene deaths. So it's a pretty significant mitigating factor just by simply having a lockdown procedure in place. If you're able to execute successfully, your chances of coming out or surviving this thing are greatly improved. Talking about having a plan, not only having the initial plan, but rehearsing it to some degree. I don't mean full blown scenario training, but you're having your lockdown procedures in place and periodically working through them will increase their effectiveness as we go. In school settings, the training has increased the effectiveness of lockdowns. So when you're looking at locking down, we want to get to a location that ideally doesn't have any windows, only has one door, which we want to lock and barricade if possible. Turning off the lights, silencing your any electronics you might have. You don't want a phone ringing or a video unintentionally playing, or Pandora going off and playing a song while you're trying to hide and survive. And move to hard corners. I'll illustrate what hard corners are here in a minute. And get 911 activated as soon as possible. If this buys you time. There's not many, and I happen to locate, when we're primarily looking at school incidents, locating an instance where an individual has encountered a lockdown room, forced their way into it, and then injured people inside. You may have injuries inside by them blindly shooting through a door or a window, but not from actually gaining entry to the room and continuing to harm people inside. So hard corners, this is what's important. A hard corners is a location in the room that would not be exposed to the path of a bullet from the doorway. And I've got some illustrations for you. So if we look at your three basic types of rooms, either a center room, a left room, or a right room, that just indicates to where the door is in relation to the room and where the bulk of the room is. In a center room, the door may not be exactly in the center of the room, but it's fairly equal distance between either wall, and you've got those safe spaces on the near wall on either side. The red area in this illustration would be a spot where a person outside of a locked door could shoot through the door and hit people inside the room. Where the white area would be locations that they wouldn't be able to get an angle on those corners. So a right room indicates where the bulk of the room is. The door's on the left, the room opens to the right. And the illustration is the same. The red area would be your threat areas, and the white area would be the spots that would not be exposed to gunfire from the doorway. And the left room is just a mirror image of that. Now, we don't want to just have a theoretical knowledge of this. If we are going to have locations set up in mind in our plan for a lockdown, we want to apply it appropriately. Like know which rooms have safe corners. Not all rooms are going to. If you've got doors on opposing sides that have equal access, or windows that run the whole length of it, you may not be able to truly lock down that room. It may be your only option, but we want to choose rooms that are ideal whenever possible. So we want to know which rooms have safe corners. A lot of schools have gone to marking those corners in some fashion, whether it's with like painter's tape on the floor or some type of markings, a visual indicator for you, your employees, or to where you can tell people a safe corner is in a room. And you want those safe areas, you want to keep them clear of obstacles. A hard corner or a safe corner isn't safe if there's a desk in the way and you can't actually get there, or if there's uh, a bunch of chairs piled up in the corner where you store chairs if it's a storage room. Want to make sure we have those corners cleared and have enough room for people to fit in there whenever possible. These things, the lockdown plan, having the room set up, I mean, it's low impact both financially and I think in access to your business. That's if I had to pick one thing to have in place, um, beyond observing a threat and getting away from it before it occurs, you're having a lockdown plan in place and having room set up for it. Probably the single greatest things to mitigate loss of life and casualties in the event of an active shooter on your premises. Uh, so having security, whether the unarmed, armed, or just contracted from local law enforcement, things to consider based on the event that you're hosting. Without knowing how many people attend, I can't tell you if or when this would be necessary on a normal basis, but I think something to consider on a case by case basis is knowing about the individuals going into it on the front end. But some things to consider just in the past several years, casualties to security or citizens who involve themselves in these active shooter incidents, they do happen. If you're going to place yourself or your employees in a position where they may be in a security role, you are accepting an increased risk of danger to yourself and your employees or your employees. Not saying not to do it, just recognize that's a thing and take that into consideration when you are considering that. As for whether or not you are armed yourself, depending on what state you're in, on whether you can legally possess your firearms in whatever fashion it may be, that's an adult decision for you. Once again, just recognizing that level of responsibility you're taking on in a situation like this. Not saying that you're civilly liable to react to a situation, but there is a potential to cause more harm if we're not proficient and trained as it goes. A big part of this is having a plan in place. When you look at just documented shooter incidents, many times a breakdown in plan is kind of where it allows for a lot more casualties to happen. So having a lockdown plan in place, having a formal plan in place where people know the responsibilities, whether they're to usher people into a particular room, or who's calling 911, or if everyone's supposed to call 911, or who has the authority to call to start a lockdown. All of these are things you need to have formalized and in place. The Parkland school shooting, that the response there was delayed and people died because people didn't understand the responsibilities and who could do what. So it delayed activation of a lockdown and contacting of law enforcement. And that's a cost-free, other than effort, something you can do on the front end to limit those risks. Having a plan in place, it's where we improvise, where we're more likely to make mistakes. So just you as a business, employer, employees, know at what point you're going to contact law enforcement. If you have an armed individual on there who's not causing issues, at what point are you going to address that individual, or are you going to? Do you try to separate people who are in a fight, or do you just try to remove everyone else from the situation? And these are all things decisions you're going to have to make based on your individual business and the responsibilities that you're willing to take on. I know I've rambled on for a bit. I really hope that some of the information that we provided is of value to you and your business. Once again, the goal here is not to overinflate the risks that are involved. It's really want people to recognize that this can occur. And even if your location is not the direct target of a threat, spillover to nearby location, it is a real thing. Having a plan in place, taking those efforts on the front end to limit and reduce damage to you, your people, your business, are all things that we're hoping to achieve. Tony or James, do you have anything to add in?
I do not. I was just was to open it up to questions if there are any from the attendees, unless James has something. I thought you did very well.
Just real quick on the spillover, the Uvalde incident from a couple of years ago. I'm sure everyone's familiar with. The shooter in that case crashed his truck nearby the school and actually engaged some funeral home employees from across the street. They came out to help him. Thought he just crashed his car. They actually engaged him with gunfire and they fled back in. So um, that one wasn't targeted to the funeral home necessarily, but they became involved. And had he decided to turn his attention to them, it would have been helpful, obviously, for them to have security protocols in place.
I don't know if we have any. I haven't been monitoring the chat. If there's any questions from the chat or any questions now from the attendees, we're happy to take them. If not, we appreciate you attending, and hopefully, like I said, it was beneficial to you and your business. We appreciate the opportunity just being able to come and talk to y'all today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barrett and 777. We truly appreciate you coming and participating with us today and giving this very, very insightful information. Unfortunately, these are instances that we do not want to even talk about, but times have changed, right? We have seen things in movies and TVs, and it happens. It happens.
I'm sorry to interject right now. I was only just able to unmute. I had a question as far as, do you have suggestions as where to best find like an emergency kit or a traumatic injury kit for funeral homes that they could have on site?
Without advertising for particular individuals, just if you Google search for trauma kits, specifically trauma kits, there are you will find a multitude of commercially available kits in a short search. The main items you're looking for when you're looking at a particular kit is you just want to have, it needs to have tourniquets in it. It needs to have some form of occlusive dressing, which it usually would be like a chest seal, and then having some type of wound packing gauze. Let's see, any Google search, the top few hits that you get will have just a multitude of options. If anyone wants specific items, if you want to fire off an email to us, we can pull up and make some recommendations on a specific kit that might work for you. I don't have that in front of me at the moment. We can absolutely make some recommendations.
The one thing I will say on that is be careful of Amazon with that.
That was kind of what I was going to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah, you can get some less than reputable items from Amazon. You really want to try to find somebody that's distributing medical items like cheap tactical casualty combat care stuff, or softy tourniquets, cat tourniquets, something like that. So a reputable dealer that's dealing in medical supplies, not just necessarily somebody or a purchase that you see on Amazon. Those can be plasticky and not really stand up to what you're going to need it to stand up to.
And one more question, within the idea of a safe location in a funeral home, as you can imagine, the space is limited in a funeral home. Do you have any suggestions on creating a safe space, knowing that basically most funeral homes, every spot is kind of called for, as far as like maybe an area with movable furniture or something like that, like a break room, or any ideas as far as kind of mapping out a safe spot within the facility itself?
Sure. So without knowing seeing the specific location, I can only make you a general recommendation. If you have storage rooms, are ideally, we talk about ideals. Ideally,
Right.
we want to have those corners clear. We recognize that may not be possible in an active business, but having that knowledge on the front, like, okay, this storage room, we have these chairs here in the corner, but we can make this room ready to go in 15 seconds by throwing these out of the way. I know this corner is safe, but I've got these items stashed here. In a perfect world, if you had your choice, you wouldn't want to have stuff there. But if you do, you're having that marked out either mentally or with actual tape or some marking on the ground, and in your plan include, okay, if we are activating a lockdown, someone's got to go to this room and move these items. If not a single location, if you have several offices, if you don't have one location that could secure every employee, or all the victims or all the bystanders, I mean, you can break it up against multiple locations, because depending on where the threat occurs, there might be one spot you can get to, another one you can't. So we're talking ideals. You want to have as many locations as you can that will hold as many people as possible, recognizing that you may not be able to do everybody. But if it's bad enough that we're doing a lockdown, bad stuff is occurring, we're really trying to minimize the effects of it.
Gotcha.
Offices are great, storage rooms are great.
Mhm.
Locations that have windows, you can take those into account. If you imagine that diagram, the safe corners from a door, you treat a window the same way. There may still be corners in a room that has exterior windows that wouldn't be visible to the exterior window or the doors. So just based on your individual location, you just have to do the best that you can in that regard.
So that would kind of fall under kind of defining rules and protocols of who would do what in a situation like that.
That's depending on your staff.
Gotcha.
You really don't want to have one person responsible for everything,
Right.
For several reasons. One, if something bad happens and that is the person who becomes a casualty immediately, generally, once again, perfect world. In a perfect world, all your employees are responsible enough that they could recognize when an event is occurring and anybody could initiate a lockdown. That's a perfect world. Yeah, I don't know your employees or the people involved in your business. But in a perfect world, everyone's aware of the signs, indicators, and anybody could initiate a lockdown, call 911. If not everybody, you definitely want to indicate multiple people who are going to take any single responsibility. So you want to have, if you have an event going on, you want to have several people responsible for ushering bystanders to safe locations or evacuating them. You want to have several people responsible for getting doors open or calling 911. Talking ideals, you recognize I don't know how many employees any place might have. There might only be one or two people, but you want to split up that responsibility as much as possible, without investing too much in any individual. So that's we're talking generalities here. I know that may not be particularly helpful for individuals, but just understand those concepts. We want to spread it out as much as possible. We want to have multiple people responsible for each thing that we can, just to prevent one piece falling out of place and causing a complete failure.
That makes total sense. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, any further questions? If we don't, then I'll go ahead and thank you again, Barrett and 777 Concepts, for sharing your expertise with us today. I'll go ahead and conclude this webinar by reminding everyone to forward your Florida license number to Heather at hbernier@ifdf.org to request CE credit if you have not done so already. I will be placing that information in the chat for you. Our next Straight Talk will be on October 16th. It will be on compassion fatigue, reclaim the joy of caring, presented by Fred Caldwell with LifeNet Health. For more information, it's posted on our website at www.ifdf.org. Again, gentlemen, thank you so much for today's presentation. It's truly, truly appreciated. An eye-opener for sure. I wish you all the best of luck. And everyone that's here attending us today, thank you for coming in today. Please stay safe and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Bye.